In this lesson, we'll learn about some of Illustrator's tools for selecting objects. Alright, so being that selecting objects is going to be something you're going to be doing so much in Illustrator as part of your workflow every day, it's important to go ahead and spend some time learning the primary tools you're going to be using for selecting objects here in Illustrator. Now, the two primary tools that you'll be using for selecting objects sit right here at the top of your tool panel. The little black arrow and the little white arrow. Let's go ahead and start with this black arrow here. This is actually called the selection tool. The keyboard shortcut to access that is V. Now you can see that if we mouse over this and wait for the tooltip to pop up, the keyboard shortcut for that is V. Now the selection tool is going to allow you to select both objects and groups of objects and move them around. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we've got on our screen here. Now I've got this sample stationery package for Woody's Barbecue again, and I've gone ahead and drug this logo off to the side, a copy of that, and I've gone ahead and kind of separated it out into the different segments or areas of the logo. So let's go ahead and zoom in here on the barbecue portion down here at the bottom and take a look at a few of these objects here. Now there's a couple different ways that we could select these objects. We can simply click on one of these objects, say the Q for example. We can click on that and we're going to get a little rectangle around that object with some transform controls on each of the corners and each of the sides. So we can select it simply by clicking on it. Now from there we can take this and drag with our mouse, dragging it around our scratch area in this case. We can also, let me just undo that with a Control Z. We can also use what's called a marquee selection. A marquee selection is going to require that you click somewhere away from your object and begin to drag a small, what is called a marquee selection here. So we want to select all three of these letter forms here. So I'm going to click and drag and select all three letters, just like so. And now we can grab all three of those letters and move them around and reposition them wherever we need to position them. Now, another thing we can do with these letters selected is we can actually use a modifier key from our selection tool, and with these three letters selected we can hold down our Alt key and you'll see that this little double arrow pops up. Now we can actually drag a copy of the letters barbecue off to the side or down below here, and we can then hold Shift if we want to constrain that to 45-degree angles. You can see how that's snapping to 45-degree angles based on the original piece of artwork here. So I'm going to drag a copy of that down here just like so, and we'll just deselect that by clicking away from it on our scratch area here. Now the marquee selection is just one way of selecting multiple objects with the selection tool. Now I'm going to go ahead and just click on this Q again here and say I want to click the Q and I want to also select this first B. All I would have to do is hold down my Shift key after I've selected the Q, and then I'll be able to come over here and select both letters here at the same time. And now we can move these around, we can copy them, we can reposition them, whatever we need to do with those. So these are individual objects we're selecting with our selection tool. Let's take a look at these little paw prints right here. Now these are actually what's called groups of objects, being that there's several shapes here, but if we click on that, all of them are selected at once. Now we're going to talk more about groups in an upcoming lesson, but I just want to show you that we can treat groups the same way we work with individual objects with our selection tool. We can hold Shift and we can select multiple groups, or we can drag a marquee selection around them and grab them and move them around, just like so. Alright, so that is the selection tool, and again the keyboard shortcut for that is V. That's an important one for you to remember. I would definitely commit that to memory. So let's go ahead and talk about a little more specialized selection tool in this white arrow right here. This white arrow is called the direct selection tool. Now this tool actually will allow you to select individual anchor points, paths, or path segments within an object. So let's go ahead and grab that here. The keyboard shortcut for that is A, and we'll grab that here, and let's go ahead and move down here to these letters that we've selected. Now we can click on the center of this Q right here, somewhere where we know we're not going to be clicking on a path or an anchor point, maybe somewhere in this brown area, just like so, and we can select the entire object. But in doing that, notice that we can now see each of these individual anchor points that make up this object. So let's go ahead and zoom in a little tighter on this here. And let's go ahead and say maybe we want to select just one of the or two of these anchor points. Let's select one at first. I'm just going to click on one of these anchor points, and I want you to watch what happens. Notice that this anchor point is now filled in blue, and the rest of these anchor points now have a little thin blue stroke, but they have a white center to them. This indicates, by the fact that this one is filled with this blue color, that we have it selected. Now, with this single anchor point selected, we can grab that anchor point and we can reposition it. We can hit our backspace key and delete it. Whatever we need to do, however we want to modify that anchor point. I'm actually going to undo the deletion there with a Control-Z, and let's put it back where it started. And let's go ahead and zoom back out here. Alright, so let's go ahead and come up here and take a look at one of these groups of objects. Let's zoom in here on this. Now, this is going to work a little differently with a group because, with the last object we had a single object. We were able to click in the center of it and select that entire object. This is going to work a little differently because this group is a series of objects. So I'm going to go ahead and click in the center of sort of this paw portion of the print here. And you're going to see that even though this is a group, we're able to select this individual object within the group by clicking on it with our direct selection arrow. Now, let's say we wanted to select several of these anchor points here, maybe these three along the bottom. We could do that again with a marquee selection, starting down here with this direct selection arrow and dragging a marquee around those three, just like so. Then we could grab those and move those however we need to, and you can see how that's deforming that object. So let me undo that. Another way to select multiple anchor points with the direct selection arrow is to hold down your Shift key and select the anchor point. So let me go ahead and select this one right here, and then I'll hold down Shift and I'll select the one next to it, and you can see here we can use that to add additional anchor points to our selection. Now, if we ever want to remove one of those anchor points that we've added to our selection, all we have to do is continue to hold Shift and click on that anchor point again, and then it goes back to the white circle instead of the blue one, and we have deselected that anchor point. Now, up until this point, we've been using a few what I've called modifier keys. Now, this direct selection arrow is actually accessible to us from many of our other tools as a modifier key. Now, what I'm going to do here is, being that we have selected this direct selection arrow first, and now I'm going to go ahead and select our pen tool. And now, we're not going to get into the pen tool in this lesson, but I just want to show you the modifier key that I'm speaking of. If we're using our pen tool, we can hold down the Control key on our keyboard and switch over to this direct selection arrow, which is really helpful, as you'll see here in upcoming lessons, for workflows in drawing vector shapes. We can draw with our pen tool and then use a modifier key to switch over to our direct selection arrow and modify or reposition anchor points. Now let's go ahead and use that direct selection arrow to grab a path. I'm going to go ahead and zoom back in on this paw print right here, and you see here we've got several path segments here. Now maybe we want to grab just this path segment that exists between this anchor point and this anchor point. We can actually do that with this direct selection arrow. So I'm going to click and I'm going to just drag that path. Well, let me just go ahead and deselect the object. Let's go ahead and click on that path to select it with the direct selection arrow, and then let's go ahead and just click and modify that path. So you can see here that we can sort of tweak that path with our direct selection arrow. Now what it's essentially doing is changing the Bezier handles for each one of those anchor points on either side of it, but in grabbing a hold of a path, we can actually modify a shape with this direct selection arrow. Now again, that's another good point. With this direct selection arrow, you also have the ability to grab and modify these Bezier handles for an anchor point. So let's just zoom in even tighter than this, and let's go ahead and select some of these anchor points, see if we can fix this just by tweaking these Bezier handles. So I'm going to go ahead and select this anchor point right here, and we've stretched this Bezier handle out. So I'm going to just pull that one back down in and around. And maybe we come over here and we pull this Bezier handle for this anchor point in as well. So not only can you select paths and path segments as well as anchor points with the direct selection arrow, you can also modify Bezier handles with that, as opposed to not being able to do that with the selection tool. So two very different selection tools there. There's also a couple more selection tools here. I'm going to hit on those very briefly, but to be honest, I don't use those a whole lot. There is first right here below our direct selection arrow is the lasso tool. Now the keyboard shortcut for the lasso tool is Q if you want to memorize that one, but the lasso tool is going to allow you to select individual anchor points within an object. Just like the direct selection arrow allows you to do. So let me go ahead and select this object. I'll draw a marquee selection around it so we can see where all these anchor points are. Now I want to come in with my lasso tool, and maybe I just want to select the anchor points right here on this side of this segment. So we can just come in, draw in a selection with the lasso tool around that, just like so, and you can see that now all those anchor points on this side of this finger are now blue, and the ones on the opposite side are white, indicating that they are not selected. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at one other tool here. This tool is called the Magic Wand tool, and it's right here underneath our selection tool. Notice that all the selection tools are right here in the top of our tool panel. So let's grab this Magic Wand tool, and what the Magic Wand tool is going to do is it's going to allow you to select similar objects within your document. So let me just show you an example. Maybe we want to select all of our objects that have this same fill color as this Q right here. So I would just use my Magic Wand tool to click on that. And you can see here that it's going to select every object in our document that has that same fill color. So we've got some of the objects over here selected. Obviously, everywhere where this logo is going to be replicated, we're going to have some sort of selection there. So the Magic Wand tool is actually pretty customizable. Let me come over here and double click on the tool itself, and we will open the Magic Wand panel. Let me pull that into view here so you can see it. You can also open that from the Window drop-down menu and choose Magic Wand here. Now there are a lot of options here. We're not going to necessarily go through all of these. At the top of this dialog, we have options related to the fill color. In the center, we have options related to the stroke. And at the bottom, we have options related to transparency. So we can check these boxes. We can adjust tolerances for each one of these in telling our Magic Wand what we want it to pick up on. So let me go ahead and close that here. In case you were wondering, the Magic Wand's keyboard shortcut is Y. I personally don't have that one memorized myself. I use that tool so infrequently, but you know what? You may actually use that more than me. So just know that it's there. Let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of other ways that we can select items within our document. Now, there's some keyboard shortcuts that we can use to actually select massive amounts of objects within our document. And let me just go ahead and zoom out here. I'm going to go ahead and do a Control-Alt-0 so we can see everything on our artboards. And I'm going to do a Control-A. That's going to select everything in my document. You can see here that we've selected everything on our artboards as well as our scratch area here. Now, another way to select massive amounts of objects, but without selecting maybe everything in your document. Maybe we just want to select everything on this letterhead artboard. So we would want to make this our active artboard by clicking on it somewhere, and then we could actually do a Control-Alt-A. And then I'll just select everything that sits on this specific artboard. Alright, let me go ahead and deselect that, and I want to show you one other trick, and this is going to be really helpful. This is something that's new for Illustrator CS5. Let me go ahead and select this tree stump right here, and I'm going to hold down my Alt key and drag a copy of that over here. And I'm actually just going to go ahead and ungroup that really fast. We're going to talk about groups in just a little bit and get into that more, but what I want to show you is that this tree stump is actually comprised of several shapes that are layered on top of each other. Remember in the last lesson we talked about the stacking order of shapes? So an interesting challenge before Illustrator CS5 was selecting objects that are behind other objects if you don't see maybe the object poking out from behind it. So in Illustrator CS5 they've actually resolved this problem. I'm going to go ahead and hold down my Control key, and I'm just going to click right here on this light tan object in front. You can see as I do that, now we've selected that object, but there's actually a little bit of a change in our cursor. We now have a little arrow next to the white arrow. Now, with this cursor and still holding down my Control key, we can click on this object to select the object behind this one, just like so. And we can go ahead and keep clicking on this object if we want to select an object even further back, just like that. So this is a really quick and easy way to drill down deep into the stacking order of objects within your Illustrator document to select exactly the object that you want to select. Alright, so hopefully you've enjoyed this lesson. There's a lot of information there. I would go ahead and encourage you at this point to practice selecting different parts of objects in your own version of Illustrator. And when you come back in the next lesson, we'll pick up and we'll talk about creating basic objects using shape tools.